Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm a freelancer, and the thing about freelancing is that you need reliable internet, and my apartment building has been having connectivity issues for weeks. The landlord keeps promising to fix it, but nothing happens. So I've been relying on my phone's unlimited data plan and using it as a hotspot for my laptop. It works perfectly fine, and I can get my client's work done without any interruptions. That Tuesday afternoon started like any other. I grabbed my usual corner table, ordered a medium coffee, and set up my laptop to work on a logo design for a local bakery. The deadline was approaching, and I needed to focus. I connected my laptop to my phone's hotspot and got to work, completely absorbed in choosing the right fonts and colors. About an hour into my work session, I noticed the woman at the table next to me kept looking over at my setup. She had short blonde hair and was wearing expensive-looking workout clothes. Every few minutes, she would let out these dramatic sighs while staring at her own laptop screen. At first, I thought maybe she was just having a bad day or dealing with work stress like everyone else. The sighing got louder and more frequent. She would huff, shake her head, and mutter things. I tried to ignore it and focus on my design, but it was becoming difficult to concentrate. I could feel her eyes on me and my equipment, like she was studying everything I was doing. Finally, she stood up from her chair and walked over to my table. She had this look on her face like I had personally wronged her somehow. She demanded that I turn off my hotspot because I was stealing all the signal and making the internet slow for everyone else. I looked up from my laptop confused. I wasn't sure what she was talking about at first. When I asked her what she wanted me to turn off, she pointed at my setup and said I was hogging all the bandwidth with my hotspot and making everyone else's connection terrible. I realized she must have seen my phone connected to my laptop and assumed I was somehow interfering with the store's network. I tried to explain that I wasn't using their internet at all, that this was my own phone's data plan and personal hotspot. She insisted it didn't matter because everything was connected. She claimed I was being selfish by taking up space in the airwaves and that some people had important work to do. Her voice was getting more aggressive with each word. I was honestly baffled by her logic. I tried to explain how internet connections actually work, telling her that my phone uses cellular data from my carrier and has nothing to do with their network or anyone else's connection speed. She got even more upset and told me not to lecture her about technology. She claimed she knew what she was talking about and that I was interfering with everyone else's ability to work. Her voice was getting louder now, and other customers were starting to look over at us. I felt embarrassed even though I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong. I tried one more time to reason with her, saying I understood she was frustrated with her internet speed, but promising that my phone wasn't causing any problems for anyone else. She declared the whole situation ridiculous and announced she was going to talk to someone who actually understood customer service. She walked off toward the counter where a young barista was wiping down the espresso machine. I watched her approach him with the same indignant expression she had given me. She told the barista she needed to file a complaint about me. The barista looked confused when she pointed directly at me and asked if there was a problem. She explained that I was using some kind of device that was slowing down everyone's internet and that it was completely unfair to other customers who were trying to work. The barista looked over at me, then back at her, saying he didn't understand what kind of device she meant. She described how I had my phone hooked up to my computer and was stealing all the signal, claiming the store's internet had been terrible ever since I started doing that. I could see the barista trying to process what she was saying. He was probably in his early 20s and seemed genuinely confused by her complaint. He patiently explained that if I was using my own phone's data, that wouldn't affect the store's internet connection at all because those are completely separate networks. She insisted that was impossible because everything is connected these days. She accused me of being inconsiderate to other customers. The barista maintained his patience and said he understood her frustration with slow internet, but my personal hotspot really wouldn't impact the store's network speed, because they work independently. I watched this entire exchange from my table, feeling a mix of vindication and second-hand embarrassment for her. The barista was being incredibly patient and polite, but she clearly wasn't accepting his explanation. She declared the customer service unacceptable and claimed she had been coming there for years and had never been treated so rudely. The barista apologized for her connectivity issues and offered to reset the router to see if that would help. She refused his offer and demanded that he make me stop using my device so the rest of them could work properly. At this point, the barista looked over at me with an apologetic expression. I just shrugged and went back to my laptop, hoping the situation would resolve itself. The barista tried one more time to explain the technology to her, but she cut him off and announced that if he wasn't going to help paying customers, she would take her business elsewhere. She walked back to her table, slammed her laptop shut, and started shoving her things into her bag with dramatic flourishes. The entire coffee shop had gone quiet, with everyone pretending not to watch the scene unfold. When she headed toward the door, she stopped at my table one final time. She told me I was incredibly rude and selfish and hoped I knew that. I apologized for her internet troubles and repeated that I was really just using my own data. She dismissed my explanation and said people like me ruin it for everyone else. She walked out of the store, leaving her untouched latte sitting on her table. I'd been teaching 8th grade math at Roosevelt Middle School for 3 years when everything went sideways. Our school was what they called a Title I school, which basically meant most of our kids came from families struggling to make ends meet, and our test scores were in the toilet. The state had gotten so fed up with our district's performance that they'd fired every single administrator 2 years before I started working there. The new administration that came in was obsessed with one thing: raising those test scores. They treated the school like a military operation, micromanaging every little detail. We had meetings about meetings, forms to fill out for forms, and rules for everything you could imagine. The kids could sense the tension, and honestly, so could we teachers. That's when our new principal came up with her brilliant idea to speed up class transitions. She decided that students were taking too long to get between classes, which was cutting into valuable instruction time. Her solution: turn our hallways into highways. Over winter break, maintenance crews came in and taped 3 lanes down every hallway in the school. 2 lanes ran along the walls in opposite directions, and there was a middle lane that was supposedly just for teachers. Signs went up everywhere explaining the new traffic flow system. When we came back from break, the principal gathered all the staff for a meeting. She explained that this was going to revolutionize how efficiently our students moved through the building. She said there would be no more chaos and no more tardiness. The students would flow smoothly from class to class like cars on a well-designed freeway. I remember thinking it was a bit much, but hey, I'd seen weirder things in education. What I didn't expect was how the kids would react. Within 3 days, every single student was driving an imaginary car. It started innocently enough. A few kids began making engine noises as they walked down the hallways. Then they started using hand signals to change lanes. Before we knew it, they were following an elaborate set of imaginary traffic rules that they'd somehow all agreed upon. Students would announce they were coming through in their Mustangs or ask permission to merge left to get to their lockers. They reminded each other to use their turn signals and waited patiently behind slower traffic. They would line up behind each other like they were actually in traffic, politely waiting their turn at intersections. Some of the teachers started directing traffic at busy hallway crossings, playing along because honestly, it was pretty cute. The kids were being orderly and polite, which was more than we could usually say. But there was a problem. The whole system was actually slowing things down. Students wouldn't pass each other in their lanes, so if someone was walking slowly, everyone behind them had to crawl along too. And the worst part was what happened when they reached their classrooms. These kids started parking their imaginary cars. I'd stand at my classroom door watching students carefully back their invisible vehicles into parking spaces outside my room. Some would spend 2 or 3 minutes trying to parallel park their imaginary cars. When I tell them they needed to get inside because the bell had rung, they'd ask for just one more second to get their car positioned properly. The principal was not amused. She started prowling the hallways during passing periods, her face getting redder by the day. She complained that this was ridiculous and that students were more tardy than ever. She told teachers they needed to stop encouraging the nonsense. That's when things got interesting. The kids figured out they'd hit a nerve, and being middle schoolers, they decided to lean into it hard. Since they couldn't cross the middle teacher lane, students had to walk all the way to the end of long hallways to make U-turns, to visit friends, or get to their lockers. So they started cruising. Kids would take their time walking down the hallways in their imaginary lowriders, complete with hydraulic sound effects. They'd brag about getting their rides detailed over the weekend and show off new modifications. Some of the popular kids organized an entire bus system. They'd link arms and move through the hallways as a group, picking up other students along the way. The student acting as the bus driver would announce stops for 7th grade science and tell everyone to climb aboard. The bus would stop at designated pickup points, and kids would climb on by grabbing shoulders. Sometimes the bus would break down right in the middle of a busy intersection, blocking traffic for everyone. The driver would apologize and explain they were having engine trouble and needed a few minutes to get it fixed. But the drag racing was what really sent the principal over the edge. Kids would line up side by side at one end of a long hallway and race to the other end, holding up everyone behind them. The racers would ask if everyone was ready and brag about their new turbo engines before taking off. Other students started playing cops, pulling people over for speeding or reckless driving. The student cops would ask for license and registration and tell the speeder how fast they'd been going. The speeding students would protest that they were barely doing 35 in what the officers claimed was a 25 zone. The classroom disruptions were endless. Students would ask to leave class to check on their cars. They claimed they heard their car alarms going off or needed to make sure nobody was messing with their vehicles. When I tell them there was no car, they'd insist that's exactly what someone who stole their car would want me to think. Kids would come back from the bathroom with urgent announcements. They'd ask if anyone was driving a blue Honda because it was getting towed right now. Other students would panic and say that was their car and they needed to go move it immediately. The principal thought it would blow over, that the kids would get bored and move on to something else, but she was wrong. The time between classes had become the highlight of everyone's day. Kids were showing up late to every single class because they were having too much fun in the hallways with their imaginary vehicles. Students started having flat tires that needed changing, running out of gas, losing their keys, getting into fender benders that required exchanging insurance information. Some kids' cars got repossessed for non-payment. Others had their vehicles stolen and had to file police reports with the student cops. Students would frantically ask if anyone had seen their keys because they couldn't find them anywhere. Helpful classmates would suggest checking the lost and found or their gym lockers. Meanwhile, I'd be reminding everyone that the bell had rung 5 minutes ago. After 2 months of this chaos, the principal finally cracked. She walked through the building one morning with maintenance staff ripping up all the lane tape. She announced that the experiment was over and that since everyone seemed to have too much time between classes, they were cutting passing periods from 5 minutes to 3 minutes. The cars slowly disappeared after that, but the principal's new solution created an even bigger problem. With only 3 minutes between classes and not nearly enough bathrooms for 1,500 students, kids couldn't take care of basic needs during passing periods. So they started asking to use the bathroom during class time, all the time. The principal, still furious about the car situation, decided this was just more defiance and started writing up students for bathroom requests. That's when things got really nasty. Kids started clogging toilets on purpose. They'd pee in stairwells, in empty classrooms, anywhere they could find. The building started smelling like a gas station bathroom. The janitor complained that he couldn't keep up because the students were destroying the bathrooms faster than he could clean them. The principal tried to crack down harder, but it just made everything worse. Parents started calling to complain. The health department got involved. Local news picked up the story about the school where kids weren't allowed to use the bathroom. By the end of the school year, Our test scores hadn't improved at all. Half the teaching staff had put in for transfers. The principal got reassigned to some desk job at the district office. During the exit interviews, students said the hallway car phase was the most fun they'd ever had at school. They'd turned the principal's authoritarian efficiency plan into the most creative act of mass rebellion I'd ever seen. After my divorce 2 years ago, I came to this neighborhood with my 10-year-old daughter to start fresh. The house came with a decent-sized backyard, which was perfect because I wanted to get a dog. My daughter had been asking for one for years, and I figured it would be good company for both of us. 6 months ago, we adopted Buddy from the local animal shelter. He's a 2-year-old golden retriever mix, full of energy and incredibly friendly. The shelter told us he'd been given up by his previous owners because they were moving and couldn't take him along. He was already house-trained and knew basic commands, which made things easier for us. My neighbor to the right has always been a bit odd. She's a woman in her 50s who lives alone and seems to have strong opinions about everything. I'll call her Karen because that's exactly the type of person she is. From day one, she made it clear she wasn't happy about having a dog next door. The first incident happened about a month after we got Buddy. I was at work when Karen came over and complained to my daughter, who was homesick from school that day. She told my daughter that Buddy's barking was disturbing her afternoon nap and that we needed to control that mutt. My daughter was only 9 at the time and was upset by the confrontation. When I got home and heard about it, I went over to talk to Karen. I explained that Buddy was still adjusting to his new home and that dogs naturally bark sometimes. I told her we were working on training him and asked her to let me know if there were specific times when the barking was bothersome. Karen wasn't having any of it. She told me she'd lived in this neighborhood for 15 years and had never had to deal with constant noise pollution before. I tried to explain that Buddy only barked when he saw squirrels or when someone walked by the fence, which was normal dog behavior. She just crossed her arms and said I had better figure it out or she'd call animal control. Over the next few months, things got worse. Karen started complaining about everything Buddy did. If he was playing fetch in our own backyard, she'd come outside and stare over the fence. She complained about him running around, about his toys squeaking, and even about him relieving himself in our own yard, claiming the smell was bothering her. I installed a taller privacy fence thinking that might help. Karen complained about that too, saying it was blocking her view and probably violated neighborhood regulations. I checked with the homeowners association and the fence was within guidelines. The breaking point came last Tuesday afternoon. I was working from home when I heard Buddy barking more frantically than usual. This wasn't his normal playful bark or his someone's walking by bark. This sounded distressed. I looked out my office window and couldn't see him, but I could hear him running around in the backyard. Then I heard my daughter screaming from her bedroom upstairs. My daughter was yelling for me to come quick because the crazy lady was trying to hurt Buddy. I ran upstairs to her room, which has a better view of the backyard. What I saw made my blood run cold. Karen had somehow gotten into our backyard and was chasing Buddy around with a large garden shovel raised above her head. Buddy was running in circles, clearly terrified, while she went after him. Karen was shouting at Buddy to come to her so she could teach him to shut up once and for all. My daughter had already grabbed her phone and was recording through the window. Smart kid. My daughter told me she was getting this on video because Karen had lost it. I rushed downstairs and out to the backyard. Karen was still chasing Buddy, who had taken refuge under our deck. She was trying to reach him with the shovel, jabbing it under the wooden structure. I demanded to know what she thought she was doing. Karen spun around, still holding the shovel like a weapon. Her face was red and she looked completely unhinged. Karen yelled that the damn dog had been barking for 20 minutes straight and that she had told me to control him. I asked her if she had decided to break into my yard and try to hit him with a shovel. Karen claimed she wasn't going to hurt him and was just going to scare him into shutting up. I told her to get out of my yard right now or I was calling the police. Karen shouted that I couldn't tell her what to do because the dog was a menace to the neighborhood. I told her that this was my property and she was trespassing and to leave now. Karen reluctantly started walking toward the gate, but she turned back and shook the shovel at me. Karen warned me that this wasn't over and that the dog was going to be dealt with one way or another. After she left, I checked on Buddy, who was shaking but unharmed. My daughter came downstairs with her phone. My daughter told me she had gotten the whole thing on video and that Karen was completely crazy. I looked at the footage. It clearly showed Karen chasing Buddy with the shovel, trying to hit him and making threats. The audio picked up everything she said. I told my daughter that was good thinking and that we were definitely going to need this. I called the police immediately. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes. I showed them the video and explained what had happened. They were shocked by what they saw. The first officer said this was clearly animal cruelty and trespassing and that they would need to speak with her right away. The officers went next door while I waited with my daughter and Buddy. We could hear Karen shouting from her house but couldn't make out the words. About 30 minutes later, the officers came back. The second officer told me they had issued her a citation for trespassing and attempted animal cruelty. The video evidence was pretty damning. She would need to appear in court next month. The first officer explained that she had also been served with a restraining order. She could not come within 50 feet of my property or contact me or my family in any way. Karen apparently didn't take this well. The officers had to warn her twice about her language and behavior during their conversation with her. The second officer mentioned that she had tried to claim the dog was attacking her, but the video clearly showed her going after him. She also said I had been harassing her, but they found no evidence of that. The court date was 3 weeks later. Karen showed up with a lawyer, which surprised me. She tried to argue that Buddy was a dangerous nuisance and that she was defending herself. The prosecutor played my daughter's video for the judge. The footage was damning. You could clearly see Karen chasing a terrified dog around the yard with a shovel, trying to strike him while he ran for cover. The audio captured her threatening to teach him a lesson and saying "this damn dog" in an aggressive tone. Karen's lawyer tried to argue that she was just trying to quiet the animal and never intended to hurt him. The judge wasn't buying it. The judge told Karen that the video clearly showed her going after this animal with a weapon while it tried to escape. This was textbook animal cruelty, not to mention trespassing on private property. Karen got fined $800 for animal cruelty and trespassing. She was also ordered to stay away from our property permanently and attend anger management classes. But then came the really good part. The judge also ordered a full investigation into her fitness as a pet owner. It turns out Karen had 2 cats that she kept inside her house. Animal control did a welfare check and found that she'd been keeping them in terrible conditions. The cats were removed from her home and she was banned from owning pets for 5 years. This happened about 8 years ago when I was still pretty naive about workplace politics. I had just finished my chemical technician training program and was excited to land my first real job at this mid-sized chemical company doing quality control work. The pay seemed decent enough for a fresh graduate, and I didn't have much to compare it to anyway. The lab team was small, just 5 of us total, with me being the only full-time employee while the others worked part-time. My manager was this guy in his 50s who always wore cheap suits and had this annoying habit of acting like he was doing us all huge favors by employing us. He'd constantly remind everyone during meetings about how generous the company was. During team meetings, my manager would always make a big show of telling us that even though we weren't officially part of the union, the company still paid according to union contracts. He'd go on about how the company believed in treating employees fairly and how lucky we should feel to work there. I bought into it completely. Why would I question it? I was making what seemed like good money, had steady work, and figured this was just how things worked in the industry. The job itself was pretty routine, testing chemical samples, documenting results, maintaining equipment. Nothing too exciting, but it paid the bills, and I was building experience. For 7 years, I just went with the flow. I got small annual raises that seemed reasonable, took on more responsibilities when I gained experience, and never really thought to look too deeply into what other companies were paying. I was comfortable enough and assumed my manager was being honest about following union standards. Then I got engaged to my girlfriend, who happened to have the exact same training as me. She worked at a larger chemical company, about 120 kilometers away, and we were talking about our future together, comparing our jobs and planning where we'd live after getting married. We were discussing our work one evening when she asked about my current salary. When I told her the amount, she got this weird look on her face and said that couldn't be right. She explained that she had started at the same wage as me 7 years ago, but with the union contract raises, she was now making 600 euros more per month than me. I said that was impossible because my manager always claimed we followed union contracts too. That's when she offered to show me the actual union wage table from her company's official contract. She pulled out her copy of the official union contract, and there it was in black and white. The starting wages were identical, but there were mandatory raises built into the contract based on years of experience and skill level. My company had been paying me the starting wage for 7 years while telling me they followed union standards. I felt like an idiot. Here I was, thinking my manager was some kind of benevolent boss, when he'd been lying to my face for years. The anger started building up inside me. 600 euros per month? That was over 7,000 euros per year I'd been cheated out of. Multiply that by 7 years, and we're talking about serious money. I started looking for new jobs immediately, but kept running into the same problem. German employment law requires a 3-month notice period, and most companies weren't willing to wait that long for new hires. After weeks of rejections, I was getting more and more frustrated with my situation. That's when I decided I had nothing left to lose. I was already planning to leave anyway, so why not call out my manager's lies directly? I made copies of the relevant pages from the union contract, highlighting the wage progression table and the job descriptions that matched my actual duties. Then I prepared my secret weapon, a formal resignation letter, completely filled out and ready to sign. I scheduled a meeting with my manager, telling him I wanted to discuss my career development. He seemed pleased, probably thinking I was going to ask for more responsibilities or praise the company. When I walked into his office, he greeted me warmly and told me to sit down, asking what was on my mind with a friendly smile. I placed the union contract pages on his desk and pointed to the wage table. I told him that he always claimed the company paid according to union contracts, but there was a clear gap between my skills, my actual tasks, and what I was being paid. I explained it was a 600 euro gap per month. His face went from friendly to annoyed pretty quickly when he processed what I was saying. I continued by telling him that to comply with his statement about following union contracts, there were 2 ways to fix this situation. Either I could get the 600 euros more that I should be making, or I could stop doing many of the tasks that were above my current pay grade. I asked him which option he preferred. He got defensive and told me I was really leaning out of the window with that statement. He said I couldn't just demand a raise like this. I explained that 30% of his department's workforce was sitting right in front of him. I told him about my fiancée getting paid the real union wage at her company and how we were planning to move in together. I said the question was where we'd live since we were 120 kilometers apart, and that my biggest obstacle was my 3-month notice period. He was starting to look uncomfortable, shifting in his chair and loosening his tie. He asked what exactly I was trying to say. That's when I pulled out my resignation letter and placed it on the desk next to the union contract. I explained that I had already written my resignation letter and all I needed was a pen to sign it. I told him he could either pay me what he'd been promising to pay me for 7 years, or he could find someone else to do 30% of his department's work. The room went dead silent. He picked up the resignation letter and read through it, then looked back at the union contract pages. I could practically see the calculations running through his head. The cost of replacing me, training someone new, the disruption to the lab operations. He said this was really putting him in a difficult position, his voice much quieter than before. I replied that it was no more difficult than the position he had put me in by lying about union wages for 7 years. He asked me to give him a day to think about it and talk to upper management. I agreed but told him I was leaving both the contract pages and the resignation letter on his desk until he made his decision. When he asked if he could at least have the resignation letter back, I told him he could have it back when he gave me an answer about the raise. Until then, it would stay right there as a reminder that I was serious about my ultimatum. The next morning, he called me into his office again. This time, he had someone from Human Resources with him, and they prepared a salary adjustment form. The HR representative said that they had reviewed my situation and decided to adjust my compensation to better reflect my experience and contributions to the company. Just like that, I got the €600 monthly raise. No apology for the years of underpayment, no acknowledgement that they've been lying about following union contracts, just a quiet adjustment that they hoped would make the problem go away. I stayed at the company for exactly 1 more year, banking the extra money while continuing to look for new opportunities. When I finally did leave, it was on my own terms with a better offer elsewhere. My replacement started at the same wage I've been fighting for, because by then they couldn't pretend the union standards didn't exist. Watching my manager's face every time he had to give his speech about following union contracts at team meetings was satisfying. I was 22 and working at a Sprint store in one of the busiest shopping centers in Michigan. This was back when cell phone contracts locked you in for 2 years and carriers charged you for every single text message you sent or received. It was a different world back then. I had this job right after dropping out of college. My parents weren't thrilled about my decision to leave school, but I needed to work and pay my own bills. The store I worked at wasn't one of those fancy corporate locations you'd see in the mall. We were what they called an authorized retailer, which basically meant we were the stepchildren of the Sprint family. We could sell phones, set up new accounts, and handle basic repairs, but we didn't have access to the billing system or any way to process refunds. When customers had billing issues, we had to direct them to call customer service or visit a corporate store. It wasn't ideal, but that's how the system worked. Most customers understood this limitation once we explained it. Sure, some got frustrated, but they usually accepted that we were doing our best within the constraints we had. I've been working there for about 8 months and had gotten pretty good at handling difficult situations with patience and understanding. On this Tuesday afternoon, I had just returned from my lunch break. I grabbed a sandwich and some chips from the corner store next to our shop, paying with a $10 bill and shoving the change into my pocket without really thinking about it. The store was relatively quiet when I got back, with just one other employee helping a customer pick out a new phone case. That's when he walked in. The man was probably in his 50s, wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt and khakis. His face was already red before he even approached the counter, and I could see the anger radiating off him like heat waves. He was clutching a cell phone bill in his hand, waving it around like a weapon. He demanded to speak to someone about a ridiculous charge on his bill right away. I told him I'd be happy to help and asked what the issue was. He slammed the bill down on the counter so hard that our display of phone accessories rattled. He pointed to a 20-cent charge for a text message, yelling that he never sent any text message and certainly didn't ask to receive one. Back then, most plans didn't include unlimited texting, and standard rates were around 20 cents per message. I looked at the bill and saw the charge he was talking about. I explained that sometimes the company sends out billing reminders or service notifications via text, but those typically don't result in charges to customer accounts. I told him I'd explain what I could do to help. He cut me off, saying he didn't want explanations and demanded that the charge be removed from his bill immediately. I told him I understood his frustration, but explained that since we were an authorized retailer and not a corporate store, I didn't have access to the billing system. I couldn't view detailed billing information or process any refunds from our location. His face got even redder. He asked what I meant by not being able to help him, demanding to know if I worked for Sprint or not. I said that yes, I worked for Sprint, but we were a third-party retailer. I explained that for billing issues like his, he'd need to call customer service at the number on his bill or visit one of the corporate locations. I told him the nearest corporate store was about 15 minutes away on Main Street. That's when he lost it. He screamed that this was unacceptable and that he wasn't driving anywhere else or spending his time on hold with customer service over 20 cents. He demanded that I fix it right then and there. I told him I wished I could help him directly, but I literally didn't have access to those systems. I explained that my computer terminal only handled sales and basic account information. He started calling me a dumb kid, saying I probably loved texting all day long like everyone my age, but he wasn't paying for something he didn't do. He accused the company of theft. His voice was getting louder, and other customers in the store were starting to stare. My coworker looked over with concern, but I gestured that I had it under control. He continued his rant, saying people like me didn't understand the value of money. He claimed 20 cents might not seem like much to me, but it was about the principle. He went on about how he worked hard for his money and wasn't letting some phone company steal from him. I told him I understood and that I wasn't trying to dismiss his concern. I agreed that 20 cents might seem small, but he was right that it was about the principle. I repeated that I just couldn't access his billing information from our location. He asked what good I was then, demanding to know what the point of having stores was if we couldn't help customers. He declared it was the worst customer service he'd ever experienced. He continued ranting about how terrible the company was, how useless I was, and how his generation would never put up with this kind of treatment. He called me lazy, incompetent, and several other choice words that I won't repeat. I stood there taking his verbal assault, trying to remain professional while he berated me over something that was out of my control. That's when I remembered the change from lunch sitting in my pocket. I reached into my pocket and felt around until I found a quarter. I pulled it out and placed it on the counter in front of him with a smile. I told him here was 20 cents for the text charge with interest. His mouth fell open and for a moment he was speechless. I could see him processing what had just happened, trying to figure out if I was being sincere or mocking him. He screamed that this wasn't the point. I said I thought the point was that he didn't want to pay 20 cents for a text message he didn't send, and that the problem was now solved. He asked if I thought I was so smart, insisting that this wasn't about the money. I asked him what it was about then. He grabbed the quarter and slammed it back down on the counter so hard I was surprised it didn't bounce off and roll away. He yelled that it was about the principle, about holding companies accountable, about not letting them get away with nickel and dimming their customers. I told him I agreed with him, and that's why I thought he should call customer service or visit the corporate store. I explained that they were the ones who could investigate the charge and make sure it didn't happen again. By this point, several other customers had gathered to watch the spectacle. Some were annoyed by his shouting, while others seemed entertained by the drama unfolding. He announced that he was taking his business elsewhere and that Sprint had lost a customer that day. I told him I was sorry to hear that and asked if there was anything else I could help him with. He walked toward the door, then turned back one more time. He told me to keep that quarter, saying maybe it would teach me something about customer service. I thanked him and told him I hoped he had the day he deserved. He left in a huff, and the store fell silent for a moment, for the other customers started chuckling and shaking their heads. One elderly woman approached the counter and told me I'd handled the situation well. My co-worker came over once the coast was clear. He asked if I'd really just paid that guy's phone bill. I told him 20 cents of it anyway. He said that was either the most generous thing he'd ever seen or the most savage. I said maybe it was a little of both. I picked up the quarter he'd left behind and put it back in my pocket. For the rest of the day, every time I thought about his face when I offered him that money, I smiled. It was such a small gesture, but it had deflated his entire argument. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.